Well, Donald Trump needs to make a huge change on his economic policies right now. During Donald Trump's first administration, his economic polling numbers were always a bright spot in the administration, regardless of other turmoil that was going on. People believed that they would be in a better economic situation if President Trump was the president. Regardless of how they felt about him personally or politically, people agreed. It was safe to say that it has not played out the same way during his second administration so far. After announcing a massive wave of reciprocal tariffs and Liberation Day tariffs on other countries, he has received huge blowback from both sides of the aisle. We know he unleashed huge tariffs on many other countries, including, and he has tariffs on Mexico and Canada right now, but ultimately, he announced tariffs on upwards of 70 different countries, tariffing the absolute, just up to 90% tariffs that he is slapping on certain countries. And it is very much affecting the polling at the end of the day. This is a poll that came out of the Pew Research Center that show 55% of U.S. adults say they're not confident that Donald Trump can make good decisions about economic policy. This is conducted over 3,600 people. That is the lowest rating on that question in data going back to 2019. Pew said, and down 14% from a survey conducted just after Trump's election last November. Clearly, Donald Trump's tariffs that he announced are not popular. When you were seeing some of the worst numbers, even jump over to some place like Fox News, where you're showing that Donald Trump has a 38% approval rating when it comes to the economy, according to a recent Fox News poll. That is not good. These were all pollsters that had very favorable numbers for Donald Trump with the economy during his first administration. But we really have to dive in deeper on this, and this is one right here from YouGov. He's underwater by 11 points, it looks like. 11 points, maybe even 12 points, he's underwater in a recent YouGov poll. You can even see it from Atlas Intel, the most accurate pollster from the 2024 and 2022 presidential election. He is underwater by 14 points on the U.S. economy. 14 points. 14 points. That is not a good place to be for a president, especially less than 100 days into his administration at this point. But the reality is that this was self-inflicted. This did not have to happen. These economic numbers did not have to go this way. The stock market did not have to correct 10%. It didn't. Because at the end of the day, Americans want a lot of the same things that Donald Trump wants. But it's the way that Donald Trump went about this that is stabbing himself in the back. He is backstabbing his own administration, which is horrible. It is horrible to think that this was something that could be controlled. This is something that did not need to happen. Economic polling did not need to go in this direction. The sentiment from the country did not need to go in this direction. I still, at the end of the day, have a lot of faith in Trump when it comes to the economy. Because I believe that at the end of the day, Donald Trump knows what a bad headline looks like. He knows how to react to a bad headline. And you can already see that he's making changes to this. He rolled out these massive Liberation Day tariffs. And you can see here that it's not the tariffs that are unpopular. It is the way that he rolled out the tariffs. Look at this right here. We're looking at economic policy. Let's see, right here. Raising tariffs against specific countries as a negotiation tactic. 11 points above water. That currently has roughly a 53% approval rating using tariffs as negotiating tactics. That is huge. That is much different than being, 14 points underwater. So over here, you're showing 42% approval of him on the economy, but somehow 53% agree with Trump that we should be using this as a negotiating tactic. But also, there was a big messaging issue. When you have people like Howard Lutnick, people like Peter Navarro going out on television saying that tariffs are going to raise massive revenues for the U.S. government. Okay, well, that's kind of an oxymoron if you're going to say that we're going to use tariffs as a negotiating tool, as a negotiating tactic, but it's also going to raise revenues at the same time. Like, how is that possible? Because if it's used as a negotiating tactic, that means the goal is to lower the tariffs. But if you're going to raise revenues by trillions of dollars over the next 10 decades, well, that means tariffs would need to stay in place. That's implying that tariffs would need to stay in place in order to raise that money. So something is not working here. Something is not adding up here, and that is the issue. It is not just the messaging, but is the way these tariffs were rolled out were not good for the administration. Because at the end of the day, you can look and see that the U.S. economy and the job market, cost of inflation, those are top concerns for Americans by and far. By and far. And the U.S. economy is now the greatest challenge that we face as Americans. Previously, it was inflation. Previously, it was immigration back in January. In March, it was inflation. And now inflation is a little bit lower, a point lower, basically the same, statistically the same. But look at this. Are you in favor of or against the new tariffs announced by the Trump administration? Almost 59%, 58% are against it. And you're losing huge support. Like men completely against it. Women completely against it. Of course, the people who don't know how to identify, 0% of people who don't know what their gender is are not in favor of it, which, is there some sort of correlation there? I think there might be. But massive constituencies that Donald Trump won with in the 2024 election, look at young people, 64% against, 60% against, 40% against, 57% against. Doesn't matter how much you're making, people are against it. But here's another question. Should these be temporary or permanent? These tariffs be temporary or permanent? Where you're seeing temporary, clearly beaten out by 13 percentage points. But this is where it starts to get a little interesting. In your opinion, how will the new tariffs announced by the Trump administration impact American manufacturing? 41% say it will strengthen manufacturing. So you look at the overall economic outlook, not good as far as the polling goes. But Americans, by and far, think it's going to help American manufacturing. They also agree that we should use them as negotiating tactics. So what does that leave? What does that leave left here? And the formula, this is what was horrible. In your opinion, is the formula adopted by the Trump administration to determine the tariffs set on each country appropriate? No, it was not appropriate. Clearly, it was not appropriate. The only country that there is an outright majority support of putting tariffs on is China. And I agree with that. Let's put them on China. I 100% agree. Put the tariffs on China. But at the end of the day, in 2024, Donald Trump won because he said he was going to lower costs for Americans. And trust me, prices are going down. But if you roll out these massive tariffs, prices will not go down. Prices will go up. There's no doubt about it. Prices will go up, and this map will start to look a little bit more like this map right here if we don't stop effing around with this. Maybe not necessarily with Ohio and Florida, but it would not look good. It would actually probably look more like this map right here, if we're being honest. But at the end of the day, Trump's economic polling is not good. But Americans, at the same time, while they don't believe that the polling is good and the economic outlook is good for America, and that they don't have a solid approval rating with Trump when it comes to the economy, they also believe that there is usefulness to tariffs. There is massive usefulness when it comes to tariffs. Because remember, he was elected in 2024 to lower costs, to bring down inflation, to have a better outlook for the American economy. It's like, simply look at this. This was a couple weeks before the election. 50% of Americans thought the economy was getting worse. Trump's elected, it immediately drops to 34% think it's getting worse. We're back up where we were post-2024 election. That is not good. This is not good at all. But the big question is what can Donald Trump do to make changes? What can he do to change the outlook of this? That is the big question at the end of the day. How? How can Donald Trump dig himself out of this hole that he's put himself in? There's a couple reasons. Trade deals is the big one. Let's listen to Caroline Leavitt at the White House right now.
To our entire trade team this morning, there is a lot of progress being made. We now have 18 proposals on paper that have been brought to the trade team. Again, these are proposals on paper that countries have proposed to the Trump administration and to our government. You have Secretary Bessent, Secretary Lutnick, Ambassador Greer, NEC Director Hassett, and Peter Navarro, the entire trade team, meeting with 34 countries this week alone. We are moving at Trump speed to ensure these deals are made on behalf of the American worker and the American people. And just yesterday, it seemed to get a little bit lost in the news, and I think it's a disservice to the American public that it did. The Vice President announced terms of reference for a trade deal with India. That is a big deal. We know when we look at the numbers, the monetary trade barriers and the non-monetary trade barriers from India, they have been ripping off the United States and American workers for a very long time. So the fact that the Vice President, with Prime Minister Modi, on that trip in India, announced these terms of reference, which is essentially a framework to move the ball forward to sign a good trade deal between our two nations, is great progress, and it speaks to the work ethic and the real labor that's being put into this effort by the president's trade team.
It comes down to trade deals. That is, I'm not going to say that's number one, because I actually have this. Let's go to number two. Number two is trade deals. He announced right away these massive tariffs on all these countries. Then he implemented a 90-day pause on the reciprocal portion of the tariffs. There was still going to be a baseline 10% tariff on the board, and the tariffs on China are going to stay in place. But he put a 90-day pause on all new tariffs, on the reciprocal tariffs that were supposed to go into place, because he saw what was happening. He wants to say yes because people were coming and they wanted to negotiate. And I'm sure there were many countries who were willing to negotiate. There were a lot of countries coming to the table because they wanted to negotiate. But he did this because it was not looking good for him. He was getting bad headlines. People in the Republican Party were starting to turn on him. And although this video that I made is probably more harsh than it typically will be for Donald Trump or a Republican administration, at the end of the day, we are harsh because we want to win. We do not want to lose. We do not want to hand control of the government back to Democrats. We agree with what Donald Trump is doing. We agree in reciprocal tariffs. We agree that we need to decouple from China. We agree we need to reshore manufacturing in the United States when it comes to critical resources. We all agree on that. But the actual tactics, the strategies, the implementation process is where we're disagreeing here. So what Trump can do is cut these trade deals, get these tariffs down to zero. And it's going to be a double positive because not only are American tariffs going to go down on their products, their tariffs on American products will go down, and their non-tariff barriers will be removed. American products will be able to find new markets. We will be able to increase GDP. Our production will increase because we were able to export our products to new markets. Markets that were initially boxing us out due to regulations or taxes, whatever it was, or tariffs. We have been boxed out of certain economies for certain types of products, like vehicles, like steel, certain things that are reshored in that country. Trade deals is how you do it. Number two is tax cuts. We know the Senate and the House are working on a reconciliation package right now to not only renew the tax cuts from 2017, but to also increase those tax cuts, lowering corporate tax rates for manufacturers who manufacture in the United States down to 15%. That would be huge for the economy. That would be huge to reshore manufacturing. Because everything else the same, there's a reason manufacturers are leaving. Because the competitiveness in our economy is not great relative to China, let's say. Now, does China use small children and unfair labor laws to do this? Absolutely. But ultimately, Apple and these other big companies are still going overseas. So we need to make it more competitive. We need to make it easier for them to do business here. Huge tax cuts. And then also with the tax cuts, if he's able to cut taxes on Social Security, on overtime, on tips, that would be huge for the economy. You're not only going to see it for manufacturers, but you're also going to see it for everyday Americans, the Americans that voted for Donald Trump, the Americans that put Donald Trump in office. That is where you're going to see massive, massive support for things like cutting taxes on tips. If you're a service worker, if you bus tables, if you're a waiter, you love to hear that. You absolutely love to hear that. If you live in a liberal state, you're going to love to see that Donald Trump wants to remove the cap on the SALT deductions, which is great. That is great. This is something that you want to see, these economic numbers. You know, you're at 38% approval from Fox News. You're at, you're at a 55% disapproval when it comes to Pew Research. We need to turn that around, because that is what Donald Trump was elected for in 2024. That's how voters are going to remember him in 2026. That's how they're going to remember the Republican Party in 2028. We need to get some wins on the table now. And then third, deregulation. Massive deregulation is what you need to do. If you want to reshore manufacturing, you need to make the permanent process easier. You need to make it easier for businesses to do business in the United States. China can throw together a rare earth mineral, I want to call it a manufacturing facility, but that's not the word. It's a processing facility. So they can process and separate these rare earth minerals. China can throw it together in 6 months, but because of the permitting and environmental regulations in the U.S., it takes us 30 years to do it. We need to deregulate, and even if it's not a permanent deregulation on certain things, we need to deregulate across the board to begin with, but maybe, a year or two period where we are going to fast track these products or this production. That's what you need to do. This is how you can change the outlook on the economy. And don't willy-nilly be throwing these tariffs around, because at the end of the day, you could have called up any of these countries, and you could have called up the European Union, said, we're going to renegotiate our trade deal. You could have called up Canada and Mexico and said, hey, we're going to renegotiate our trade deal that we negotiated with the Trump administration in 2020. Trump campaigned heavily on the USMCA in 2020. Heavily, he campaigned on it. And now he calls it a pathetic deal. Okay, Donald, your administration was the one that made this deal. If you don't like it, great, but you could have gone about this in such a better way. And that is what's so frustrating about this, is people support this. People support tariff in China. We support bringing manufacturing back to the United States. We support reciprocal tariffs. The data shows that, by and far. The data shows that Americans support that. But the way that Trump went about it was it was his ego that got in the way. They could have called up any of these countries and done this, and done it without all of this disruption. And all these Republican conservative influencers on X want to say, oh, there was a plan. There was no plan. Shut the hell up. There was no plan. Oh, by the way, Royce White, if Minnesota wants to lose the 2026 Senate election, nominate Royce White. Let's just start there. But this was embarrassing. And Trump can fix this still. He still has a huge opportunity to fix it, but he needs to fix it now. The 2026 midterms are just around the corner. He needs to fix it now. So let me know your thoughts down below. Do you agree with my assessment on this? Do you agree that Americans by and large support what Trump is doing, but the way he's going about it, they do not support? So let me know your thoughts down below. As always, like, share, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and we will catch you next time, folks.